welcome to this virtual seminar. I'm Ben Ormsby. I'm the Yorkshire editor of thebusinessdesk.com, and over the next 45 minutes, we'll be exploring what the post-COVID world might look like and what opportunities there might be for businesses to come from it. I'm joined today by a panel of business leaders, so I'll do a quick introduction to them all. We have Mandy Ridyard, the Finance Director at aerospace engineering firm Podgermax. Roger Hutton, the Joint Managing Partner at Clarion and the new Chairman of Yorkshire County Cricket Club. James Harding Terry, the co-owner and Managing Director of Steepley Corner Group of Companies. And Gareth Harris, the Regional Head of Restructuring at RSM. So good afternoon all, and thank you for joining me today. So let's start. Before we start and focus on the future, I wanted to have a quick discussion with Mandy and James about how you're faring in the current climate with COVID-19. So Mandy, do you want to go first?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Ben. So at Podgermax, we're global experts in flight control components and assemblies. So for those of you that don't know what that is, it's the bit that makes the flaps work on aeroplanes. We mostly work in civil aerospace, although we do some defence work too. And for us, it's just been extremely exciting in all the wrong ways. So we've been working really hard to make sure we can continue to supply our customers, and we still have demand at the moment, to make sure, obviously, that we keep the safety of our workforce. That's paramount at the moment. So we've taken a lot of decisions around changing shift patterns and segregating people. And obviously, we've moved 30% of our people to home working. And then we've invoked our business continuity plan. And that business continuity plan has been around lots of different areas, but about primarily ensuring stability and liquidity, and secondly, about ensuring engagement with our key stakeholders, which are our employees, our customers, our suppliers, our bank, and any government institutions that we're involved with. So it's been really busy, and I don't think I've had a lot of sleep. But at the moment, we're doing okay. We've changed a lot of our machines, redesignated them to make ventilator components. We've turned quotes around in hours, not days. And we have a fantastic workforce who have worked across weekends, through nights, for no extra pay, as we're making them at cost, just to get the product out of the door because it's the right thing to do. So yeah, it's not what I expected to be doing a couple of months ago, but it's certainly kept me busy.
Same question to you, James.
Hi, Ben. Yeah, interesting times, as Mandy's just said. We actually started with a routine business continuity planning session late February, just ironically as coronavirus started to become on the radar. So we formed our own COBRA team of directors really as early as February, and we planned to put in isolated shifts, so that we could create resilience between different shift patterns, and also increase the safety of our employees by making sure they had a huge amount of factory space each, so that they could maintain their distance of 2 meters from each other quite comfortably. Our business is split into three. We have Seven Hills Fabrication, which is laser cutting and fabrication, and we make products for pretty much all the sectors, from rail, power generation, commercial vehicle construction. And we have Beastie Automotive, who are the UK's largest tow bar and towing electrics manufacturer. And then we have Acumen Technology, which is an IT consultancy business. So we've kind of dealt with all very differently. Beastie Automotive pretty much has no sales because nobody's allowed to tow and go to campsites, etc. at this point in time. Seven Hills Fabrication has a good order book. And once again, the employees that we've had, our colleagues, have been absolutely amazing, and they went on to a shift pattern of 4 days on, 4 days off. In effect, we created their own small communities where they agreed that they would have no contact with the other shift outside work, even if that was family members. So, you know, the credibility of the employees to go, we can do this, is absolutely phenomenal. Our order book is strong. We have customers and our supply chain that seem to randomly be closing for random amounts of time, either through not understanding the regulations or not being able to comply with them. I think it's primarily the former, and I think the news headlines have had a massive impact on incorrectly closing a lot of businesses that the government has asked to stay open. And I think that's unfortunately going to have a much bigger impact on our economy as we come out of this. I think I might have gone off piste a little bit there, Ben. Did that give you enough of an answer?
Yeah, no, that was perfect. I think that now leads us on to a bit more of the future focus. Obviously, you've hinted at there's been a lot of big headlines in the media, and one of the big talking points is what the economic situation is going to look like that businesses will be relaunching to when pause stops and everything resumes. So I guess to you, Gareth, how do you think the world will have changed, and what opportunities do you think that'll bring?
I mean, there'll be an awful lot more home working for starters, Ben. I think we'll all get used to a little bit more of that. I mean, I suppose the big question for me really is how quickly will we come out of it, and how will those be released? Certainly, if you look internationally, it's been a slow release. And therefore, what we're talking to our clients about is not expecting a business as usual picture for probably at least another 4 or 5 months. Once you get back to that business as usual, I think there's a big question as to whether there will be a pent-up demand, and people will pick up some of the sales that they've lost over the period. My personal view is actually things may have changed quite significantly. I think you look at retail as one example. People are, I think Amazon will be incredibly busy at the moment. People are buying more and more things online. That will help the leisure sector, because I think people will be looking more for leisure pursuits, and so you'll see that whole change in retail, I think, will be massive, and home working, I guess, will be massive as well. So yeah, there's a lot of change out there, and a lot of things for people to think about. I think my advice to people at the moment is to plan for when they are going to come out, not to just wait for it to happen, and try and determine what their coming out looks like, rather than just waiting for events to unfold around them.
Yeah, so obviously we don't have that clear timeline yet of when this lockdown will end and how we will come out of it. I guess, what should businesses be doing now to prepare, or what can they be doing? Roger, perhaps you could answer that one.
Yeah, I guess there's a whole host of things, and it really depends on what sector you're in and what you anticipate. I guess that no one's really can bank on being back to work in full before I would have thought September. Anything planning on that before that seems dangerous. I'm with Gareth that I can't really see that your business as usual until the next calendar year. And then I think demand will depend on sector by sector. One of my issues would be that the level of unemployment this creates and what that does to demand in retail and different sectors, and who's got what money to spend, I think. So a lot of businesses that we're advising at the moment are, one of their contingencies is up to a 20% reduction in turnover. And then if they imagine that is going to be the case, what do they have to do to prepare for that? But that's financial. I think, for me, probably the thing that within Clarion we're concentrating on and with clients, it's about engagement. I think the big thing for me is engagement. So primarily for each of the businesses we're in and the people listening, I think it's engagement with their employees to make sure that what is drawing the businesses together and the culture of the organization remains strong, which is a big challenge remotely, but it's critical because everyone's now doing very different things than they were doing 2 months ago, but they're all vital for the business, whether they're working longer hours, doing different jobs, or being furloughed. They need to know why they're doing that and what matters. And then secondly, engagement with your supply chain, with both your suppliers and your customers, understanding their individual problems. So I think engagement in this remote time is probably one of the most important things I would suggest.
Obviously, engagement is a big part of that is leadership. So, you've touched on furloughed employees, but how do you think business leaders can create momentum and build a vision amongst teams who may now, they're separate by working remotely, but also some people being furloughed and others still being a core worker? Does anyone want to jump in?
Is that for me?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, fine. Look, well, I would say this, that a business doesn't fail, hopefully, because of coronavirus, and actually, if the business was in a good position with good culture and a good product before this happened, it should have confidence that it's going to be in the same position when it comes out against its competitors. and therefore I think it's part of the leader's role to paint that vision and to paint each small step that we take along the way until we get back to work, and then when we're back to work to make sure that we maintain whatever advantage we had before we went into it. And it's the leaders group to make sure that everyone understands what decisions are being made and how they impact on the future of the business. So certainly for the businesses I talk to, it's all about making sure that you keep your competitive advantage, and everyone works hard to know what their role is in doing that. So it is just a communication piece and creating a picture.
Ben, can I just add to that? I completely agree though with what Roger is saying. At this point in time, it's all about communication, and we're stuck in this world where communication, as we know from this event here, is completely unrecognizable from where we were a few months ago. But at this point in time, the communication isn't your usual vision. Communication is about making sure everybody's safe, and then beyond that, encouraging and making this point that there will be a positive and viable future when we get to the end of this, and that's the communication method message at this point, I think, for everybody.
Yeah, so we've actually just had a question come in from Ian Ellsworth from Dynamic Capital and Investments. He's asking the question: do the panel believe that within 3 to 4 weeks the lockdown will become completely counterproductive and the damage to major sectors of the economy could be terminal?
So again, Ben, let's be clear. There are companies at this point in time that could be operating and are not operating either because they don't understand the rules or because they don't believe they can operate safely. The message very clearly has to be out there to all the business leaders of every sector whenever this is possible. If you can go to work, you should be going to work. You should be creating momentum back in our economy again. If you can work safely, you should be doing so. And that, apart from a few companies which are officially have to close, is absolutely the message that the press now should be pushing. Not the false information that we've had in the headlines over the last few months. We need them to be very clear now that if you can operate safely and you're not in a restricted sector, you should be operating, you should be keeping the economy moving.
So with messaging and communication being such a key topic, I guess, what are the best ways you're finding to communicate with quite large groups of people and large teams? Perhaps Mandy.
Yeah, so we have 30% home working, as I said earlier. We have a evening communication that goes out pretty much every day with an update on where we are as a business, what's happened, what's going on. We also use Teams remotely to engage our home workers so that they're all part of that same information, which they get anyway through the email. But we also have some fun things going on Teams just to create some office fun so that we stay as one as a team. So word of the day and little fun things like that keep everybody part of our culture. We then have a magazine that goes out weekly, which talks about what's going on within the whole Project Max family. So from market news through to business news, obviously COVID news, and then down to if somebody's had a baby or whatever else is going on. So to try and keep everybody connected at all the time, and I think that's really important. And it's also then to keep connected, not just to our employees, but to our customers and our suppliers. A lot of companies are choosing not to pay their suppliers because they have their own difficulties. I think that's short-term thinking. If you can avoid that, you need those suppliers there afterwards. And also it's keeping in constant contact with your bank to make sure that they know what you're doing and they're supportive of where you're going, because you may need their help.
So looking at supply chain aims that sort of we touched on, how will supply chains change once we're through this? Can we expect supply chains to be closer to home and less internationalization? Are you noticing that as manufacturers that you're looking close to home for things? And do you expect industry to have a more diversified approach, such as distilleries producing hand sanitizer as well as gins and alcohol?
So can I come in then?
Yeah,
so I think regionalisation is one of the things that might come out of this this crisis. And obviously different parts of the world are going to be in lockdown at different times, and we export and import globally. So we've had to find different routes to getting product to the Philippines, for example. So we have tried to make sure we secure our home supply chain where we can, or that our supply chain has got enough stock for us to overcome certain issues. And also what we're finding is different ways of doing things. So getting product from and to different places, we're finding different ways of doing that, which we hadn't looked at before. So it's about really being creative about how to get through it, and regionalisation is one of the aspects of that.
Can I just chip in as well, Ben? I think that one of the things that we're seeing, and rightly seeing, I think, is people looking down their supply chain at where there's risk rather than just low cost. I think that may change. You know, that a lot of people have gone for the lowest cost manufacturers or the lowest cost supply, just to try and sort of drive down the cost and increase their profits. I think, you know, there's a balance to strike between the risk in your supply chain versus lowest cost. You know, if ultimately you are heavily exposed to supply chains from around the world, I think that will change.
Cool.
Yeah, I agree. And we're obviously, we've done lots of reshoring work over the last few years and bringing products back, which have been manufactured in China, back to being manufactured in Sheffield. And we are hoping and assuming again that more people will be looking at shorter, more local supply chains and actually starting to use maybe UK companies a little bit more. That's certainly our expectation.
I would see this as an opportunity in a number of ways, Ben, in reality, because, you know, people buy on a number of bases, and you talked about price, but ultimately, and this is the same for every one of our businesses and the businesses that are listening now, this is an opportunity about having partnerships, and just in terms of that payment piece, when your suppliers aren't paying you know, when you're not paying your suppliers, they'll remember, and when your customers aren't paying you, remember, and actually, everyone just needs to broker deals, share the pain, and work in partnerships in a collegiate fashion. And if you do that, I think the bond's going to be deeper and stronger. And actually, you'll have longer lasting relationships coming out the other side of it. So this is the time to actually develop your relationships in this supply chain, I would have thought.
That's a really good point, Roger, yeah.
So we're all in agreement that there could be some, you know, this hiatus and this pausing could lead to some fundamental changes within working relationships and the strengthening of some and a refocus on opportunities. With that in mind, obviously, marketing and business development are always, speaking as a former marketing professional, one of the first areas to be cut during economically challenging periods. But how much is there for businesses to actually think we need to be investing in this to help capitalise on potential opportunities that are going to come out of it as we leave a recession?
Well, I'm going to start just very briefly. I have to say that Clarion was growing at about 20% a year for the last however many years. And I actually said to our sales and marketing team about 2 months ago, this is the year that I'm not really bothered about any growth. I'm not worried about turnover. I just want to make sure the operations are tip top. I'm rather regretting that right now. And the real answer is that those guys are working extraordinarily hard, because the minute that we come out of the blocks, we need to be in the best position we possibly can. And without overdoing it, that's about talking to anybody who has got an issue now and building relationships, maybe not for value right now, but for long-term investment position right now to understand clients and how we might add value. So it's the place to invest, I would have said, rather than not to invest right now.
It's a bit like planning with custard, though, isn't it? At the end of the day, no clue what the future, we don't know what the time frame, and at that point you have to have a very different mindset than if you can go, right, in 2 weeks time this is going to happen, which point you can plan. So you have to be watching like a hawk to see when we can start planning and starting investing in things again. But at this point in time, we have to assume that this could last for a good few more weeks, and as Mandy said earlier, then it's all about liquidity and making sure you're guarding your cash. So you know,
in terms of marketing, it's not just about being at a trade show or having a new website. It's about understanding your value proposition. That's absolutely essential. So for me, the sales and marketing team are critical to understanding that value proposition. And I own Project Max with my husband. It was a very small company when we bought it, and it's a bit bigger now. But we're now getting back into the detail, the micro detail of where all the cost sits. And that is part of your value proposition. I think understanding that and then understanding which bits of that need communicating mean that your marketing team should be working really hard to get that information for you alongside your accountants.
It's an opportunity to do things a little bit differently as well, Ben. Not I don't know, you sometimes get stuck in a rut about, well, we always used to go to that show, or we always used to, you know, we always take that person to this event, or whatever it is that you normally do in terms of marketing. It's an opportunity to almost reinvent. So, you know, those sort of personal touches that we've been talking about, the communication, you know, just picking up the phones, people having video calls, you know, it does work. It's not ideal, but it does work. So just different ways of doing it. And I guess your digital message becomes even more important. You know, people do buy things, you know, before they actually sort of, you know, try. They actually research on the web before they actually go and buy something these days. So actually, you know, making sure your digital message is absolutely, you know, top drawer is super important at the moment.
Yeah.
So obviously, we're as a region, there's been some headlines recently about us being quite hard or heavily hit by it. You know, how do you think there's enough recognition for the regional differences to the impact of COVID-19, or would you like to see more or less, or more focus on the national? Anyone want to be brave?
Well, yeah, I'm happy to do so. It's ridiculous that we have a national response when clearly, regionally, this disaster is unfolding at different rates, at different speeds, you know, in each region. It's crazy. I don't know how else you could deal with it, but it clearly should be a regional response. And I think there probably should be a little bit more common sense applied within each region, maybe not going quite as severely as the Swedish approach to this, but there has to be a bit more common sense as to who can operate safely and who can get on with making sure the economy keeps moving, even if that moves around the country over the next few months or even few years.
So we've going back to an earlier point, we've touched on the impact it's had in terms of changing working practices, and people, you know, we're all working remotely now, or most of us are. So do you think this is going to change the way people engage with their business full stop? So are we going to see more people looking at ways of working remotely? Will we see less people using public transport, perhaps because they've seen the headlines of people becoming ill after it? You know, what do we think of the short, medium and long term?
Well, let me start. We got 250 people, and we had a process where we started doing agile working, which people could be off a day a week or a day every 2 weeks. And there was a lot of us of my age were rather skeptical about what the effect of remote working would be. And we got everyone out of the office in about 3 days, and 250 people working from home. And it hasn't had the slightest negative impact on our proposition, which is a bit of a shock to the management team. I have to be honest about it. The other bit is that when you're talking daily with people, you can see that how a lot of people are missing the face-to-face interaction. So you're just hearing an awful lot of noise about, do you know what, I love being at home with the family and the circumstances I'm in, but equally, I really miss the engagement face-to-face. And so I don't think we're all going to end up working remotely, but clearly what we've learned, at least, and I imagine lots of people learned, is that a number of the practices we had before, which we thought were vital, are not vital. And a number of the ways we managed ourselves were, in hindsight, we can be done differently. And I think there are opportunities for every business arising out of this situation to understand how to do things more efficiently, to put more value into your proposition. So I think there will be changes on every business, but I don't see how it's all working from our bedrooms for the next 20 years.
So Ben, maybe your next seminar needs to be on whether HS2 is actually essential, or whether we should be doing a bit more of this and a bit less travelling around the country.
That'd definitely be a topic of some debate. I can feel. We've had a question asking that, saying they can see a situation after restrictions are lifted that how staff were treated will become the next PPI ambulance chaser style lawyers trying to drum up business from employees who feel they were handled it unfairly or incorrectly. Do you think businesses know enough about all the avenues open to them in the furlough process and things to sort of disagree with that?
I think the messaging has been quite hard for owners of businesses to manage. In fact, the furlough position, the regulations seem to change on a regular basis. I think there's a law about consultation process, but it was quite hard to go through a consultation process for people when you got safety in mind. So you had a number of difficult decisions to make as an employer. I think hopefully your engagement with your employees will not want them to be part of the class action and work out that's not for the greater good of the business or indeed themselves. But yeah, I think actually without further legislation in relation to this, I think there could be problems that some groups of lawyers who like class actions might seize onto. I think it is a potential threat. I think you're right.
I guess the other elephant in the room in all this is, prior to this situation, we'd left the EU and we were looking at trade deals to come into play towards the end of the year. How do we think those deals can still be made by next January, or do we think that things may change within that Brexit wheelhouse? And what impact is that going to have on the international markets that we all operate in daily now?
I think there's only so much bandwidth within government at the moment, and you can sort of understand where their focus is and should be right now. I think there will have to be certain decisions that are put off and delayed, and how long that delay is, who knows? But I think there's only so much they can do, would be my view.
I completely agree. Though I would say that if the world is in recession, there's more need to make trade deals than ever before. So that is one thing in the favour of making trade deals.
So looking ahead to that future and how businesses can prepare, we've touched on a couple of key areas already of messaging and communication. What else do you think from a structured process are the things that businesses can be doing now to prepare for that moment when we all get the go ahead to go back, and hopefully this pent up demand can be met?
I'm going to throw a question out to Gareth on the back of it. So one of the issues might be for businesses that they can get funding if they can get it. They can get better facilities with the banks, but the difficulty is that the businesses might accrue more and more debt, and then what difficulty that causes them when they come out of this. And I've got to service that debt, and I imagine that's going to be an ongoing issue that I guess Gareth in the restructuring team looks at quite a bit.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that, Roger. I think that's one of my major concerns, really, is, I think there's two short-term problems that may lead to longer-term issues and restructures, which is, number one, is that sort of war for talent that we were all talking about a couple of months ago. If you let your best staff go, or you don't treat them properly, then you potentially, those short-term cuts could damage you long-term. The other one is the amount of debt that companies are taking on. I can completely understand why they're not wanting to take on debt, because they don't know that they're going to have the ability to repay it. I think there will be an awful lot of restructures later on this year, early next year, as people realise that actually that debt is not serviceable, particularly if the HMRC debt has to be repaid by April next year. It's just not going to be possible for many businesses. If you've not paid any HMRC debt for 3, 4, 5, 6 months, and then to have to repay it over a 6-month period is just not feasible.
Do you imagine, Gareth, that the government will give out further legislation to stop that problem arising?
I think they'll have to, if they want to prevent a rash of insolvencies, as businesses just realise that actually that debt's not serviceable. So, I mean, there's new legislation in the offing, Roger, anyway, but that's emergency stuff. I think that policy is going to have to be extended. HMRC preference is going to have to be delayed. Those sorts of things, they're going to have to change.
So obviously people are a big debate during this, from, as we said, furloughed staff and staff working and working from home. This brings about questions, I guess, about onboarding new starters and recruitment of people, but also how you develop that talent while they are remote. So have any of the panel been looking at ways to continue that personal development of staff while they're not in the office?
We've kind of had the opposite at this point in time. Obviously, we're a manufacturing business primarily, and we have apprentices, which clearly they are trained in the classroom a little bit to start off with, but ultimately they are trained on the shop floor by more senior people. And we've actually, unfortunately, said, look, we can't create a safe environment for you at this point in time in order to be able to carry on with your apprenticeship. This doesn't reflect on you, and we will bring you back on board as soon as we possibly can. But at this second in time, it's not safe for you to be on our shop floor. So I think that's just a delay. I don't think that's going to be any great, strategic change. It's just that there will be a delay to some of our apprentice starters for the foreseeable future.
And I think Gareth had it right that there's a war on talent always. So for us, we're growing fast, and therefore it's always about getting quality people in, and we're still making and completing offers at the moment, albeit it's a bit odd because actually that onboarding process is difficult, and getting a sense of culture and proper training is difficult. But on the basis that I think hopefully we'll be back in the office within 2 or 3 months at worst, I think it would be foolish for us to stop the recruitment process right now.
We're doing the same. We're still onboarding where we need that specialism. We're not onboarding people that were in there for the growth element of the business. But we are taking the opportunity where we can to do online training with people. So things like Incoterms, different things that you can buy packages online. People now have a little bit more time because they're not commuting to work anymore. So if they're home working, or if they're at work and an apprentice can train at home, then we're running online training for them where we can, so that we upskill them in areas that may not have been the priority, but are actually really good things to have.
I think that's an interesting avenue, because obviously everyone's having to become more au fait using these technological solutions. So whether it's things like Zoom or video and digital meetings, do we think that that's going to lead to an opportunity for greater engagement with potential overseas markets directly, because people are now more accustomed to sitting behind their computer at home or at work and having a phone call with someone for a business meeting rather than necessarily, not?
Well, I know I've just joked about it, but the whole HS2 thing is completely contrary to the new technology that we're suddenly left with, aren't we? Why would I travel to wherever when I could have a meeting? There are times when you absolutely need to be with the person that you're sat with, but actually this works incredibly well. And I'd not really used video conferencing at all before the last 4 weeks, and it does work incredibly well. Even this bizarre, the round table that we're having sat here is working really well. And I didn't have to travel to Leeds this morning, Ben, so win-win.
Yeah. Equally, I'm enjoying it from sunny Doncaster.
Apart from the coffee shops in Leeds.
Yes, that is true. Looking at it, we've had another question come through that obviously before this situation, a lot of the trade, and we're going back to trade, was around trade deals with the US and potentially with China. But obviously with both those markets quite heavily affected by the current situation, do you think there's other new markets that can be found and that people should be starting to look to or do their research on, ready for when business resumes? Anyone want to go?
I think we already trade globally.
Mm-hmm.
So we look at all those markets. I think what we will be looking at, because we work in aerospace, is where can we diversify? So rather than looking at regions, we'll be looking at markets. And then the markets will take us to wherever the region is. But it's just making sure that we can find enough work to maintain the growth that we plan for. And I think that'll be challenging.
I think it's a good point, but I think it'd be hard to find a market that hasn't been affected by.
Oh, I think we might have lost Gareth partway through his answer.
It hasn't been affected in some way.
Gareth, I'm afraid we lost you. Literally, as you started speaking, you vanished.
My phone went off. Apologies. It should have been switched off.
But yeah, do you want to give that answer quickly again? I think I got the gist.
I just think there isn't a market that hasn't been affected by this. I think there is a tipping point for all economies. Going back to the earlier question about, there's a tipping point when the economy takes a dive between the sort of health benefits and the economic sort of losses that are incurred. Those tipping points will be similar for most economies. So we'll all come out of this at slightly different times, but it'd be hard to pinpoint a particular market. You might say India or something like that, but actually they've been massively affected as well.
I wonder whether there's going to be a roller coaster going on, because different governments will have different views on how much grief they allow the economy to suffer versus preserving lives and health. But I guess if you rush everyone back to work quickly, you might have your economy going quite fast, and then you might find another surge of coronavirus that puts you in difficulties in 3 or 6 or 9 months' time. It's the exit strategies that are really the issue, and no one's actually yet seen what's a successful exit strategy. And there'll be different ones around the world. And I can see that reverberating for many, many months, even longer than many months, as to which country is doing well at any given stage. Right now, we might all like the countries that have gone back to work quickly. In about 3 months, we might not like them at all because there might be another epidemic coming around. So I think it's a watch and see, isn't it?
Yeah.
However you look at it, the world that we face in the next few months is going to be very different from the one that we're used to. The vaccine isn't on the horizon yet for, I would assume, at least 6 months. So social distancing, companies that are operating will ultimately be operating under these social distancing guidelines for a substantial amount of time. So when people are restarting, they need to restart in a safe way. So it will be challenging, absolutely. And as you say, the next few months, we're going to see some very interesting bouncing, I suspect, of new cases and additional lockdowns.
I think that in the last 4 weeks, we've probably all learnt to make decisions extremely quickly on the back of our business continuity plans. And I think that's now going to be the new norm. So we have to be agile and fleet of foot. And if anything, at least what the last 4 weeks has given us is some exposure to that level of speed that we can take forward. I think the critical thing to do after this, the initial stage of it anyway, is to review our business continuity plans, the actions that we took, what worked and what didn't, and then learn from those so that when the next crisis arrives, which it will, then we're ready and we're better and we're faster and we're leaner.
And we're all just slightly older.
And greyer.
Well, within my case, a much longer beard. But so, so we've had an interesting question. Obviously, we've talked about the importance of markets and of marketing. How important do you think insights and research into customer bases and future customer markets are going to be moving forward?
Absolutely essential. Absolutely essential. The more research you do and the more knowledge you can get at the moment about your market, potential markets that you could work in, and your own business, I think is the key to being the springboard to post-COVID.
So, and on that, do we think that, you know, we've seen the country almost and communities look at ways to support local suppliers and local businesses, like, you know, never before, according to social media. Do you think that this will create that buy British reputation, or do we think that, as you've touched on, people won't just be looking at the price anymore, they'll be looking at its provenance a bit more?
I think Roger had mentioned it earlier. I don't think it's particularly about buying British. It's about looking at risks in your supply chain, and if you can shorten that supply chain to have it more regional, then potentially you're also de-risking that supply chain as well. But yeah, good point.
So I'm just flicking through the questions. Sorry. Looking at it, I guess we've had another one that's around taking on risk and debt. So with a sensible plan to keep the businesses alive during the crisis, you know, means that if they're taking on debt, it means they're likely to go down very quickly. And taking on debt without personal guarantees for SMEs gives you a good chance of long-term survival and more. And the business that lives to fight another day, and ultimately the banks are covered in the main by the government guarantee, so where the business fails in due course. So I think it's saying is, do we think that taking on debt, if you know it helps you live to fight another day and move on, and you think you can deal with it, is still an all right approach to take? Or
I'll take that one, Ben. I think you do everything you need to do to survive in the short term, and once you know you can survive, then you can plan for the future. And if that means taking on some debt in the short term, then I think that's probably the right thing to do. Ultimately, that whether you can pay that debt back or not, only time will tell. I mean, nothing surer than if you're putting together a set of forecasts at the moment, they will be wrong. But you've got to give it your best shot. And if that shows that you ought to be able to repay that debt, then why wouldn't you take it on at this stage if it means the survival of your company?
And to add to that, I think that's got to be exactly right. But to add to that, anecdotally, what I'm hearing is that the banks are tending only to offer the government loans where they think they would have lent in the first place, where it's a viable business, or your secondary lenders too will only really want to advance money when they're confident there's going to be a repayment plan. So actually, it's never really a solo decision. You're working in partnership with your funder in any event, and it's a matter of convincing them that you've got the right restructuring plan or the right product at the end of this, which is going to allow you to repay it. But survival first, tomorrow afterwards.
Yeah, and ultimately you've got to be able to service that debt, haven't you? But absolutely. Survival must come first, but it must be competent survival.
Either that or Gareth's going to be very busy.
So I think that we'll bring it on to our final question and quick closing remarks. But Roger, someone's picking up the point you said earlier about how positive the remote working had been embraced at Clarion, and whether that'll lead to a change in floor plates and the size of offices that businesses look to take in the future.
Is that one of my employees done that? They're wanting, what do you mean?
It's anonymous, is all I can say.
Look, actually, I can answer for us that in fact, no. There's been a move to a lot of businesses about hot desking. We don't do that at our place. I think people will be much more open to agile working and new working practices. So yeah, I imagine in general that people's space requirements will be affected by this as they've learned new techniques to work. I think that's bound to happen. But as I said earlier, I think culture and engagements quite often, whatever James says, is about face to face and feeling the energy across the table, and people will still want to do that, and therefore I still think there'll be a decent demand for commercial retail space. Though who knows what the new square foot cost will be. Gareth will probably have a better idea than I on that.
So yeah, I think that brings us to we'll have one last question from the ones that come in, and obviously current times make planning, as we've said, very difficult. Do you think that after this, planning will take a different approach? Will there be less emphasis on the 3 to 5 year long-term plan and more on that? Will it be more of a shorter term reactive and strategic plan moving forward?
So can I jump in there first, Ben?
Yeah.
I mean, clearly in normal circumstances, you're still going to do a 3 to 5 year plan, aren't you? Otherwise, you've got nowhere to aim for. Inevitably, during that 3 to 5 year period, things will happen which change your time frame, and you must at that point react on a short-term basis. But ultimately, your 5 year plan still needs to remain. 5 years is always going to be a little bit less accurate than your 1 month or 1 year plan. But ultimately, yes, we still need to be forecasting that far ahead.
I think your 3 to 5 year plan is essential, but I think what you need are more dynamic tools to understand on a month by month basis whether you need to reforecast and rebudget. Maybe the shift will become that you need as you said, the goal for 3 to 5 years, but you need to be able to react quickly if things aren't going to plan and make that a bit more agile.
Yeah.
Right. And on that, I shall bring the discussion to an end. So thank you very much to all the panelists for joining me. Thank you to everyone who's tuned in. There are some additional questions that I will look at seeing if we can answer offline and include in the write-up of the article, which will feature on the businessdesk.com later this week.